Hi, I'm Spiro with SP Wood Art, and thank you for joining me today. I hope your holidays are going well and everyone's healthy and safe. And I'd like to give out a big resounding thank you to all my subscribers. This week I'm going to do a video on general lathe maintenance and a overdue needed repair that I have to do in order to do some upcoming videos on indexing. I know that a lot of the maintenance that I'm going to show you today in this video will apply to many different types and brands of lathes. I hope that you stay with me to the end and enjoy the video. Thank you.
The needed repair. Inside this headstock, there's a gear with 24 teeth that locks the spindle, and all of the teeth are broken off. And I'd like to note that I really like this lathe. This is a PSI Turncrafter lathe, and in no way does the gears breaking have anything to do with the lathe. It was actually my own doing. The spindle lock on this lathe is not meant for taking the chuck off when it's stuck or various other tasks which can break all of the teeth inside on the spindle lock. It's only meant for indexing. This is a great little lathe with a lot of power and a lot of features, and PSI has always been very helpful to me. So I need to start disassembling the headstock to get at the spindle. If you have one of these little magnetic pans, it's a good idea to put all the screws on them so you don't lose them. Now, using an Allen wrench, I'm going to remove the grub screws from the hand wheel on the spindle. Next, I will need to remove the drive belt wheel from the top and the drive belt, and I'll need to loosen the motor with this lock, and then it just moves up to remove the belt. And the first thing I actually should have done was unplug the power to the lathe for safety. Now I'll need to unscrew with a little Phillips screwdriver here. There's 4 screws. The display, or the variable speed display. Being careful not to ruin the gasket and the little wire inside that needs to be removed. Next, I need to remove the sensor, and this is attached by 2 little screws. I'll just set that aside, and now you can see that there's 2 gears in here. The first gear to the right is for the spindle lock, and the second gear on the left is for the sensor. You can see here that I have to move the sensor wheel in the gear to the left, or else when I remove the spindle, it'll break off on the spindle lock up on top of the lathe. And that was a shot of the broken teeth inside the lathe. And here, to make sure that those gears stay to the left, I just shimmied some wood in there. Then I used a dowel with the dead blow to get the spindle through the second bearings. Next, I'll remove the gears and these 4 screws, and then the spindle. Now I'll screw on the sensor gear to the new gear with teeth. Now for the headstock maintenance. Since the headstock is already apart, I'm going to do the cleaning now, or the general maintenance now, and that would include wiping everything down with a rag, using Q-tips for those hard to reach places. I usually use WD-40 or a penetrating lubricant to clean my lathe parts. This helps to prevent rust, and a well-oiled machine works best. Next, I'll use this super lube. It's a synthetic white grease, and I'll put that all over the bearings on the inside and outside and really try to get it inside any of the crevices on the bearings. Now to prevent surface damage, I'm going to clean the spindle inside and out. I'm going to use a rag with a dowel for cleaning the inside of the Morris taper. They actually make tools for this that you can buy, but I just use a rag with a dowel. This will also prevent your drive centers from getting damaged or stuck and provide a better friction fit. And for cleaning the spindle, I just use WD-40 and then I wipe it off. Now I'll reassemble the spindle and the gears. And I'll just make sure that the spindle is absolutely flush with the front of the lathe. And before I tighten the gear down with the grub screw, I need to make sure that the gears are properly aligned with the top pin that comes down for the spindle lock. Then I'll install the sensor and make sure that it's properly aligned with the gear inside. Now I can reattach the speed display and attach the wire and finish assembling the rest of the headstock parts. If you have an issue with a squeaking belt or your belt slipping, you can also use belt dressing. It comes in a spray and you can spray your belt with it and it works really well. At this time, you'll also want to check for any cracks on your belt and replace your belt if needed. I also clean the spindle threads with a nylon brush and some WD-40, and then I'll wipe that off with a dry cloth. And I do this often to prevent any chucks from sticking to the lathe. Now, this shouldn't really be an issue on this lathe, but you want to make sure the centers are exactly aligned. I also use the same methods on cleaning my spur drives to prevent surface damage, and I'll also sharpen the teeth using a diamond card file. I also clean other types of drives like this step drive and remove the spring and the point to clean. The Tailstock Maintenance. One of the most important areas on the tailstock to maintenance is the underside. If you're having an issue with the tailstock creeping or moving backwards when you tighten it, then you can adjust that by tightening with a wrench the nylock nut, which is attached to the T-nut bolt on the cam lock. Then I clean the tailstock quill by unlocking the lock handle far enough to surpass the keyway slot, I believe it's called, and clean that with some WD-40. And you can completely move the quill and clean it if you like, but I didn't need to here. It was pretty clean. Then I'll use some WD-40 to clean in between the quill end and the crank handle. Then I'll continue on wiping down the entire tailstock with WD-40. I'll also make sure that the grub screws are not loose. And another important aspect of cleaning the tailstock is to make sure that there's no dust or debris underneath. So I'll clean that as well with WD-40, or you can use a paste wax like this Johnson's paste wax. Then I'll use some Q-tips with WD-40 to clean my live centers, and a wooden dowel with a paper towel to clean the Morris taper on the end of the tailstock. The Banjo Maintenance. I always wondered why they call it a banjo. Please let me know if anybody knows. So this is pretty much like the tailstock, and the nylock nut on the bottom, you can adjust that if you're having issues with the banjo creeping. You'll want the underneath to slide effortlessly over the lathe bed, so you'll lubricate and clean and make sure that there's no debris or dust underneath or in the tool rest post hole. Which brings me to maintaining the tool rest, which is extremely important. I'll take my fingernail and run it down the top of my flat tool rest to check for any nicks, dig-ins, or divots that can make it so when you're sliding your tool on transverse cuts, you can actually stop during a cut. You can use a Scotch-Brite pad or some steel wool to clean the tool rest if there's nothing really major with the top of the tool rest. But if there is something major like a big gash or even a chip, then you'll want to use I believe they're called bastard files, a nice flat file, and file the top and the front, and you want to make sure that you hold your file very flat as you possibly can. And I'll also round over the edge a little bit with the file. Then I'll add some WD-40 after I'm done with all of the sanding or filing. Now I use sandpaper for round tool rests on the top, and I'll start at either 100 or 220 and go up to like 1,000, or finish it off with a Scotch-Brite pad depending on how bad the nicks are. I also use sandpaper on my round S-curve tool rests for bowls, and then I'll finish them up with some WD-40. And this also includes the tool rest posts. The lathe bed. Now there are several ways to maintain your lathe bed, but the ultimate goal is to make sure that your banjo and tailstock move over a smooth surface with ease. If your lathe bed is not in bad shape, you can just use a Scotch-Brite pad or some steel wool with some WD-40 and call it a day. If it's in pretty bad shape or has stains, you can use denatured alcohol and scrub, or even a light sand to remove stains, and then cover it with a penetrating oil or a paste wax. I have seen people use Boat Shield T9 like a penetrating lubricant in place of WD-40, but I've never used it. You also want to make sure you clean underneath the lip and on the insides, because the banjo and tailstock T-nut bolt slides there. Then I'll use my favorite WD-40 and pretty much hose the lathe bed down and wipe it, and then leave it and let it soak in overnight. And because my motor is underneath the bed of the lathe, it will collect wood shavings that act as an insulator and can further heat up the motor, which is not a good thing. So I use a nylon brush to clean those off periodically, or sometimes I use my shop vac with a little attachment, or my central house vac with a brush. You also want to make sure that your lathe is level to the floor. This will cut down on vibration or any unwanted vibration, which can hinder some of your quality turning. And since I use this lathe as a portable lathe, I want to keep the rubber feet on it, so when I move it around in different places, it's pretty secure. So I will just adjust my rubber feet until it is level. And I also just use some clamps on the handle to clamp it down to the bench. And here is my lathe level after I have adjusted the rubber feet and reclamped it down. And all that's left is to just try it out and make sure everything is working properly and sounds good.
Well, I hope you're still with me and that you've enjoyed the show. I didn't bore you too much with a non-project video. It really makes a difference having a well-oiled machine, especially your tool rests, making sure that those are silky smooth. And if you're turning wet wood, you definitely want to clean your lathe afterwards. Some woods you may even have to squeegee your lathe. So until next week's video, thank you, subscribe if you haven't, and as always, stay safe.